All right, good morning, everyone. My pleasure to welcome you to Exit Issues for the month of February. For those of you that are attending in person, we're glad to see you. Socially distanced safely here and enjoying a good program. We're admitting our participants as well, so we would ask them to make sure that their cameras and microphones are off and muted so that we're able to see the presentation as well as possible. I'm going to open the morning with a request for patience and grace because this is the first time juggling in person and virtual together. And being married to a teacher, I can't imagine how they taught like this every day for a period of time through the pandemic. So we want to go through a couple of notes on the program. For those of you that are attending virtually, we're going to take your questions this morning via the chat as we normally do. So to do that, you want to mouse over your screen and that will bring up the control panel. Hit the button with the 3 dots there and the word more. That'll bring down the drop-down menu. Select the chat function and then submit your questions to everyone via the chat. We'll be getting those done as well. For those of you that are joining us in person this morning, we want to ask you, as we normally do at our Exit Issues, I realize it's been about a year almost since we did one of these in person. There are question cards on your table. Jot your questions down. There's a pin at each setting, so you don't have to share pins. We have also placed some hand sanitizer on the table for you to use in between if you need to and are comfortable. So we've got a great program this morning and looking forward to a good time, and hopefully we'll manage this and everybody will have a terrific experience. Now, as we usually do at Exit Issues, we're also going to do some poll questions right out of the gate this morning. That our presenter, Chris Spencer from the Governor's Office of Policy and Budget Director, kind of wants to get a feel for our audience and what their thoughts are with regard to the budget. So if you have your smartphone out, go ahead and get it out now. Or if you're online, you can use your smartphone or your computer, whichever you are using. Go to pollev.com/DRCC. if you are using the web browser on your computer or smartphone. If you've downloaded the app because you've attended a previous Exit Issues, you can just open the app and for the presentation, just enter DRCC and that will take you to the app. Depending on whether you're online or using the app, it'll look a little bit different between those two uses, but this is a rough estimation of what the screen should look like for you. We'll ask you to enter your name just so we can get some feedback if need be. We will note that your name does not appear on the screen. All the answers are shown in the aggregate, so nobody gets called out. So we hope to get your honest feedback. For all our questions today, we've got 4 of them. They're all multiple choice, so the question will look like what's on screen to the left. Whichever answer you think is most appropriate, just tap that, and it'll log your response, and we'll see the responses start to come in on the screen. Once you get to a screen like this, it'll say, welcome to the presentation. You're ready to go and respond. Has everybody been able to kind of get logged in, check it out, and have any quick questions before we get into our poll questions this morning? All right, very good. You guys are pros. So first question. 2020 was one of the toughest years for Floridians from both health and economic perspectives. How do you perceive Florida's financial outlook? Positive or negative? With some kind of clarification from Chris on what he's viewing there. Very good. Being an optimist myself, I appreciate a positive outlook. We'll move on to question number 2. We'll admit Amanda. When you think about Florida's budget and financial outlook, what concerns you most? Keeping taxes low, helping small businesses, holding the line on college tuition costs, and expanding school choice scholarships. Which of those concerns you most? I'm not surprised to see small business being kind of the leader in the clubhouse at this point. That's a majority of our membership, the majority of our economic engine, not only locally, but nationally. All right, Question number 3. As we continue to prioritize vaccination of our seniors and rebuilding Florida's economy, which industry are you worried about the most? Restaurants, bars, hotels, leisure activities, real estate. This is interesting. A lot of dancing going on in the responses. Across the board concern. No surprise, I think the hospitality is there between those top 2. And our final question, Governor has prioritized funding for Florida's environment and education. What other area of the budget is most important to you? Public safety, transportation, or public health? Interesting feedback. Very good. Well, thank you very much for your engagement. I'm sure Chris will be able to take some of this information we've received from these 4 questions, and we'll get the show rolling. At this time, I'm going to stop the screen share so those of you that are watching virtually will be able to see the camera and who's on board. And I'm going to welcome to open the program our 2021 chair of the board from Bomar Construction. Please welcome Mr. Len Marinaccio.
Thanks, Ken. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first hybrid eggs and issues. And as Ken said, please have some patience with us. It's a work in progress, but we'll get it to where we're doing this like second nature, and so we can all kind of bring everybody back in the room together again. As you can see, we've got an audience that's both in person and some that are logged in virtually. So we hope that the experience is going to be great for everybody, both online and here in person today. Today's program will feature Chris Spencer, Director of Policy and Budget for the Office of the Governor. The legislative session starts March 2nd, and a tight budget for 2021-22 is expected. State revenues are down $2 billion, which means the Senate and House budget committees must decide how to fund Medicaid, education, infrastructure, tourism, advertising, and all the other programs that they have to deal with on an annual basis. We hope to learn today what options the legislature has to increase state revenue and learn what the governor's newly released budget priorities have for this challenging year ahead. Before we introduce our speaker, we'd like to recognize our elected officials who are either in person today or online and provide an opportunity for some of our sponsors to give some remarks. At this time, I'd like to recognize some of our special guests that are with us today, either online or in person. I think that County Council Member Heather Post is here with us in person this morning. And County Council Member Danny Robbins. Also here in person, County Tax Collector Will Roberts. And then I believe online, we've got Matt Metz from the Office of the Public Defender. And Ormond Beach City Manager Joyce Shanahan. Did I miss any other elected officials or staff representatives with us this morning? Awesome, thank you so much for attending. It's so important to our membership to be able to interact with you guys. We really appreciate it. For our sponsor recognition this morning, we've got many generous members who go above and beyond to help us bring relevant and meaningful programs to our members and to the community. Our presenting sponsor this morning, Halifax Health. Please welcome John Guthrie.
If you hold the microphone for me. Let's see, where am I? Right here. Welcome everybody. It's good to see everybody out and about. Wonderful. Every time I get together with people, I feel like since the community owns Halifax Health, I owe you a report. So I'm going to give you a couple numbers just so that you're in the know. We have 40 patients right now with COVID. It's come down from having 50. Our average through this whole pandemic was 20. We've had over 800 now. So, we have been extremely lucky in this area. Another number though that came across my desk, how many people know what a Baker Act is? I suppose those online do too. A number came across my desk, and I think it's kind of important for today's discussion. How many times do you think we received at Halifax Health a person under a Baker Act last year? Any guesses? Not Diane. 5,933. So that's 20 a day. So that's something that we have to, as we move forward in our community, think about. We are extremely well resourced for a crisis in mental health. We are not resourced to avoid the crisis right now. And so I think that's something that we all need to be thinking about as we think about our budget and all those other issues, because it is growing. In addition, the demand for uncompensated care reached $56 million at cost last year, which we all funded. Thank goodness. Imagine what it would look like if we weren't here to do that. So the hospital is in great shape, but our community is pushing the boundaries of what our health system can take. So it's something I think all of us need to be aware of. And so I want to deliver that message and just let you know that, we're there and we're doing everything we can, but we have larger issues outside of our walls. And I'll turn it over to Diane.
Hello and good morning. As any of you that have come historically to these meetings know that I'm Diane Park. I'm from the News Journal Gannett, Local IQ, USA Today. I can keep going. As some of the comments this morning made me realize, those of us that have been in business for a while, I started in a media company 25 years ago. And back then it was kind of easy. You figured out what somebody needed. You made sure you knew your data, your statistics, and what your vehicles could do, and you matched them up, and it worked just like that. And then our industry started changing, and like many industries, segmentation occurred. And it's been really interesting now to be at the forefront of a drastically evolving company to see that, you know what, it's gotten back to where it's a little easy again. And the reason for that is because the number of tools that we've been provided. Gannett has invested in all of their resources and platforms. Just for digital marketing alone, we've invested $90 million. And aren't we glad we did it then? Because now the economy as we know it is changing, and we have to be nimble to address the needs of our communities. We've continued to invest in our content. The content that we have as a media organization is unmatched. When you look at national coverage and then local coverage. How many of you know my husband? All right. He is out there all the time sharing information that we all need to know. So it is interesting that change and evolution is inevitable, but who thought we'd go through this last year or so? And we are dedicated to making sure that our communities, our businesses, regardless of their size and their scope, have what they need to get through this time. And we're willing to change and evolve as we go, because that's part of business now, isn't it?
Thank you, Diane, and thanks, John, and thanks to Daytona News Journal and to Halifax Health for all their support of the Chamber and for making events like this possible. At this time, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, who'll be joining us virtually. Chris Spencer, the Director of Policy and Budget for Governor DeSantis. Previously, Chris was a government consultant with the Gray Robinson Law Firm in Tampa and a legislative aide to Florida Senator Jeff Brandes and Representative Clay Ingram. He earned his bachelor's degree in economics and urban regional planning from Florida State University. Originally from St. Petersburg, Chris now lives in Tallahassee. He's active with the Florida Republican Party and is married to Gina Spencer. Everyone, please virtually welcome Chris Spencer this morning.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. I can, admittedly, I don't do a lot of these Zoom virtual meetings, and so bear with me here. I've got a little camera off to the side sitting on top of my printer. So I'll try my best to look into the camera as I speak, but I just wanted to have a conversation with you guys about the budget. You know, the discussion about the governor's budget recommendations really goes back and starts back in March of last year. The legislative session last year started in January. And so every year, as you know, it goes for 60 days. In the even numbered years, it starts in January now. In the odd numbered years, it starts in March. And so last year, session started. We had a revenue estimating conference in January of 2020. Things were looking stellar. Florida's economy was at the pinnacle. We had the lowest unemployment rate we've ever had. Revenues are coming in extraordinarily strong. High amount of reserves, unallocated general revenue. Basically, everything was looking very, very positive. You know, as the pandemic started to unfold towards the end of session, there really wasn't any major considerations put into the budget related to the pandemic because session ended at the very beginning of March. It was still too early to tell what was going to happen and what the resource needs were going to be from the state and what the impact to the state of Florida was going to be at that time. The governor has until June 30th every year to act on the budget. And so we started to see, and after the governor declared a state of emergency and activated our coordinated emergency response network and our division of emergency management started to expend resources, and we started to see the impact of the pandemic. The governor made a very prudent decision to hold on acting on the budget. He received the budget from the legislature back in March, but he didn't act on it until just a few days before the end of the fiscal year in June. And what that allowed us to do was to monitor what the revenue situation was for the state and monitor what the economic performance was during the pandemic, during the worst periods of the pandemic, and then make adjustments to the budget accordingly. Unlike in Washington, D.C., Governor DeSantis under the Florida Constitution has line item veto authority. And so every year, governor can go through and any specific appropriation that's listed in the budget, the governor can specifically veto that issue. And as a result of our a desire to preserve the maximum flexibility for revenue and for the fiscal position of the state, closing out fiscal year 1920, the governor made a $1 billion worth of vetoes in the current year budget, which was the budget that he acted on in June of last year. By doing that, that freed up about $500 million worth of general revenue to be available in the event that the revenue picture looked worse than we thought, or was even as bad as some of the initial estimates during the worst period of time of the pandemic was forecasting. Now, just for some context, in the 1920 fiscal year, again, which closed out June 30th, 2020, state of Florida revenues were down about $1.9 billion for the year. So that's really the activity that was captured by the pandemic impact that resulted in that loss was basically April, May, and June. Those 3 months, we were down almost $2 billion. Luckily for the state, we had almost dollar for dollar that same amount of unallocated general revenue in our portfolio of reserves, and so that loss of revenue was absorbed. And we actually ended on a general revenue perspective, net positive, albeit marginally, but net positive on July 1, starting the 2021 fiscal year. Now, moving forward from there, revenue estimates looked pretty bleak. I think it was 19% or so on the first question that have a negative outlook on Florida's fiscal position. I don't blame you. That was probably the consensus opinion back in August of last year. We were looking at upwards of $5+ billion worth of a revenue shortfall over the 2021 fiscal year and the 21-22 fiscal year. That situation has significantly improved. We've had since then additional revenue estimates. The most recent one being in December, just before the new year, improving the state's forward-looking fiscal position by a little over $2 billion net improvement from that August estimate. Still, the revenue outlook for the state is lower than it was in the pre-pandemic January period. However, much improved from where things were in August when we were, I would say, at the worst position when it comes to economic data and revenue collections. As a result of that, it's been a challenge for the last year, looking at, or really the last 10 months, looking at the development of the governor's budget recommendations. The governor has been very, very cautious about not trying to overcommit the state to recurring obligations and expenses that future revenues are contingent upon expectations of what revenues hopefully will be. He wants to be very conservative in committing the state to any of these long-term investments. Now, there's a couple of things that have significantly improved the position of Florida as it relates to our revenue, and the big one of those is the CARES Act. As you all know, back in March, the Congress passed the CARES Act, providing a significant amount of resources to states, tribal governments, and local governments. Florida was a direct recipient of a little over $5 billion worth of direct aid to the state of Florida, with some conditions attached. The funds can only be spent, and this is through the Coronavirus Relief Fund. The conditions are that it cannot be for revenue replacement, so it has to be for things that were not anticipated in the most recently adopted budget. And it also has to be directly responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, and it has to be spent by the end of calendar year 2020. HR 133, which was the second bill that was passed and signed into law just at the end of December, extended that deadline until the end of 2021. Those funds, when the state of Florida received them, helped the state's position substantially, because it enabled the state to be able to continue a lot of these services and operations that we had redirected to COVID response, whether it's social services programs or whether it's a hold harmless of funding for our school districts. A lot of those types of activities that we did that were substantially redirected from what their original appropriated purpose was, those activities and operations were supported by the Coronavirus Relief Fund that the state had, and enabled us to bridge that gap of where our revenue collections were at their lowest last year, and allow the state to then begin to recover, and for us to be able to use our state revenue then to support the redirection back to normal operations for those programs and services. Now, with all that said, the budget recommendations of the governor are $96.6 billion, which is $4.3 billion higher than the current year budget. And so, some people might say, well, hold on, that doesn't make any sense. So if we're down revenue, how is the budget growing so much? Couple key points on that. Number one, when we talk about revenue shortfall, we talk about the impact of COVID-19. What you're talking about really is reductions of forward-looking estimates. And so you can use the analogy of Elon Musk, says next year he's going to sell 1 million Teslas, but he only ends up selling 900,000 Teslas. But last year he sold 800,000 Teslas. Is he down 100,000 Teslas, or is he up 100,000 Teslas? I would argue he's up 100,000 Teslas. But he's still down from his estimate, right? He's down from what he was expecting to do next year. In Florida, we use a consensus revenue estimating process. And so in a partnership with the legislature, the House and the Senate, and the Economic and Demographic Research Office, which is kind of the state's economics office, and the governor's office, we all meet regularly throughout the year and look at various aspects of the economy, various contributing factors that go towards revenue collections, and develop estimates forward-looking on what those revenues are going to be. So the rate of growth of revenue was lower than what we expected pre-pandemic. However, with the recovery and the strong recovery that Florida is experiencing, we're expecting to be back to pre-pandemic revenue levels by next fiscal year, possibly even this fiscal year. So it's the 21-22 fiscal year. That's really good news in supporting the state operations. Clearly, the state did just fine with revenue levels the way that they were before the pandemic. So if we return to those levels, that eases some of that pressure on having to make drastic decisions on the general nature of the government. Now, a lot of our costs have gone up. And so in the governor's increase in his budget, the $4.3 billion, more than half of that is reflected in federal spending. and specifically on Medicaid. Medicaid makes up the substantial bulk of that increase of our cost. Medicaid is always a trailing indicator from economic downturns. You will see a large increase in enrollment in Medicaid when the economy starts to suffer. And then as the economy improves, you will generally see that that enrollment increase continues to be at elevated levels and starts to taper off later than economic recovery is underway. So the cost of that to the state has been substantial. There has been some relief provided from that with the federal government in the form of the enhanced FMAP. And I think our friend from Halifax Health very familiar with the FMAP process and how that contributes in the Medicaid formulas for funding in the state, but providing the additional 6.2% enhancement on that match the federal government provides in funding has helped the state be able to absorb that spike in enrollment, that unanticipated spike in enrollment in Medicaid pretty well. And so far, the federal government has provided that enhanced FMAP rate for the entirety of our fiscal year. And in addition, we've received indication that they intend to extend that for the first 2 calendars of the next fiscal year. So essentially, through the entirety of the 2021 calendar year, that FMAP enhancement should remain in effect. That's not a long-term solution, because as soon as you lose that FMAP enhancement, then the contribution the state has to provide for Medicaid will increase. However, with Florida's robust economic growth and our decline in unemployment and the policies of Governor DeSantis to keep the economy open, we are hoping that when that FMAP enhancement is no longer available to the state, that many individuals will be back in work and off the Medicaid rolls to the greatest extent possible. That's an unforeseen type of a outcome. We don't know how that's going to look yet. All we know right now is how many people are currently on Medicaid and the cost that the state's absorbing from that. Looking specifically into some of the major highlights of the governor's budget. So ever since taking office back in January 2019, the governor's #1 priority has been the environment. He issued an executive order, I believe the first day of office, committing the state to a mission to secure $2.5 billion in investment in water quality and water and Everglades restoration over the 4 years of his first term. And we arrived at that number because that's $1 billion more than has been invested in those types of projects during the preceding 4 years. So the governor felt that it would be a substantial investment, showing that it's a priority for Florida to protect our resources, our water resources, and to really prioritize Everglades restoration. We're now halfway through the governor's first term, and we've secured a little over half of that objective. So we're on track, and the governor wanted to make sure that despite the impact of COVID-19 on the state's finances, we wanted to continue to maintain that priority. And so the governor does include the minimum requisite $625 million of funding for Everglades projects, for Everglades restoration, and various water quality improvement projects in the state budget. Additionally, a new project the governor included in his budget recommendations relates to resiliency. As we see, sea level rise has impacted communities across the state. Miami has had substantial flooding in the last year, really multiple years. I'm from St. Petersburg. There are neighborhoods in St. Petersburg where during a high tide, you may not be able to drive down the road. So those are problems that I don't remember having as a kid. These are things that our communities have to become more resilient against and prepare for. And it has real tangible economic impacts. The rising cost of flood insurance is something that reduces home affordability. It's a tax on Floridians that own homes by water when you see that constant increase in your flood insurance costs. And the more kind of resiliency project that we can do to make our communities better protected against sea level rise and hardened against intensified storms, those are the types of things that we want to prioritize in Florida. And so the governor, in his budget recommendations, created a new program that he's seeking approval from the legislature for, called the Resilient Florida Program. Resilient Florida is proposing a $1 billion investment over 4 years for capital projects that serve towards improving resiliency in our communities. And it's designed to be a partnership with local governments, grants that are given to local governments that have some skin in the game. Local governments need to come up with some matching funds, whether it's federal funds that they get, or if it's local funds, or if it's some type of an in-kind, if it's land, whatever it is. We want this to be a partnership where we can leverage that amount of investment from the state to really maximize the investment in communities for resiliency. The governor is proposing to bond these projects because we are at historically low interest rates. I'm sure some people in the room here are in the banking finance industry. You would be shocked at the interest rates that the state is getting right now on some of our bonds. You know, we're refinancing bonds at less than 1%. Our bond guys have never seen anything like it. But given that we have historically low interest rates and Florida's debt ratio is extraordinarily low, and we have a very high credit rating, we have access to a capital market at a very low rate, and we can make these types of investments that will pay dividends in the long run and improve the quality of life for Floridians and improve economic performance, I believe, for those communities impacted. So the governor's recommending having that program ramp up starting in year one with about $167 million worth of bonded total capacity for capital projects, ramping up to the full $1 billion by year 4. And our revenue stream to pay for that bond is some of the unallocated portion of our dock stamp collections. I'm sure many of you in the room are also in real estate, and you've seen it's been the hottest market probably ever. Our revenue collections from dock stamps has outperformed every month, even over the estimates, even over some of the pre-pandemic estimates. People want to move to the state. People are refinancing their mortgages with these low interest rate environment. The real estate market has been stellar. And as a result of that, our documentary stamp tax collections have been stellar as well. So using some of that gain, we want to lock that in, and we want to be able to use that to help finance some of the resiliency projects that we need to do in the state. Kicking over, I remember on one of the questions that you guys asked, what's some of the other priorities, outside of education and the environment, and I'll get back to education in a minute, but some of the other priorities, and I think the number one that came up was transportation. In the governor's office, we kind of group together transportation and economic development in the same pool. Here in the Office of Policy and Budget, we actually have a unit that is the Transportation and Economic Development Unit. We view infrastructure investment as an economic driver. The annual Florida DOT work program is $10 billion, and that is a huge job creator. And it's obviously vitally important to have high quality infrastructure around the state to be able to continue to accommodate our rapidly growing economy. There are some limitations to the work program. It's a 5-year work program. You have to start at the local level. You have to get a project kind of programmed in and move up the process and get to the point where you're funded at the statewide level. And that works for a lot of these large scale investments. You want to build a bridge, you want to expand a highway, those types of things. But there are often projects, infrastructure projects, that you might need quick turnaround on, which may be able to facilitate some economic development in a region or in a local community. And that's why we have the Florida Job Growth Grant Fund. That was created back, I believe, in 2015. And what it does is it provides some very flexible funds at the discretion of the governor in partnership with the Department of Economic Opportunity and Enterprise Florida, our economic development agency, to identify projects and be able to fund them quickly. And it's split into 2 pieces. It's really, you can use Job Growth Grant Fund money for infrastructure or for workforce training. Now that we are looking at the Florida recovery from the pandemic, the governor believes that investing in these types of programs is important. So the governor recommends a $50 million appropriation for the Job Growth Grant Fund to be able to provide those funds for some targeted specific types of infrastructure development. Furthermore, the governor also recommends an additional $50 million in what we call the Road Fund. It's the Economic Development Transportation Trust Fund. It's a program that hasn't been used in the last couple of years, admittedly, because Florida's economy was rocking and rolling for the last few years. But what the Economic Development Transportation Trust Fund is designed for is to be able to do transportation infrastructure, specific types of investments that are tied to a potential for economic development. So some of these things can be, right-of-way expansion, signalizations, a new access road, little things like that can be a big deal in trying to get an expansion of a business or bring a new business into a community. Those types of things, that's what the objective is for the road fund. The governor recommends $50 million for that so that we can also have more flexibility in targeted economic development investment to try to bring jobs here, or keep businesses here, or grow businesses that are already here. And then in addition to that, the governor's also recommended $50 million for Visit Florida. Our tourism marketing office, which is Visit Florida, especially now more than ever, is going to be critical as we are marketing the state of Florida for people to return to the state as we continue to improve from the pandemic. Everyone in the room, I'm sure, knows how important the tourism industry is to the state of Florida, and telling the story of how Florida has persevered through the pandemic, how Florida has done it right, how we've preserved and protected the most vulnerable while keeping the economy open, I think is an important message to tell as we continue our recovery from the pandemic. Now I'll go back to education for a minute, because that's the governor's top two priorities have always been environment and education. The state of Florida had a lot of wins over the last few years, especially in the school choice area. The creation of the Family Empowerment Scholarship last session was 2 sessions ago, and the expansion of that scholarship last year was a huge win for the school choice movement in the state of Florida. And what the Family Empowerment Scholarship does is, for those of you in the room that may be familiar with the Florida Tax Credit Scholarship Program, it's similar, provides a voucher to cover the cost of tuition for students to enroll in private school. However, it's funded directly through the FEFP, which is the Florida Education Finance Program. The Florida Tax Credit Scholarship Program, which has existed for, I think almost 15 years or so, that is funded through donations, against which tax credits are applied. And so there's a taxable donation aspect to that. The FES is rolled up in our education system, funded through the FEFP, and is part of our public K-12 financing enterprise. The growth of that has been a priority for the governor. Every year, the growth of the FES scholarship, as far as number of kids that can benefit from enrolling in it, is capped at 1% of overall enrollment in the K-12 system per year. We've got 2.9 million or so students. Don't quote me on that. I don't have it in front of me, but about 2.9 million students in the K-12 system. So 1% of that every year is the additional growth that can go into the FES. The goal is to provide an option for choice for where to send your kid to school for every Florida family. Priority is given to lower income individuals. However, as you exhaust the amount of lower income individuals that are attempting to enroll in the program, you can move up the income ladder from there. But again, priority is for lower income individuals. So after the FES was created 2 years ago, the governor felt that last year was a year that was going to be the year of the teacher. Florida consistently was lower than we would like to see it in the amount of compensation for teachers. The governor set out before last session with the objective of making Florida in the top 5 in the country for average starting pay or average minimum pay for teachers. And we arrived at the number $47,500 as the minimum salary for a public school teacher, with the goal being that, one, this will help us to recruit more teachers. There's a shortage of teachers. We needed to recruit more. And two, it'll have an impact of providing state investment in the salaries so that we have the compression effect going up from there. Hopefully that we can get more increase in compensation for some of our teachers that have been around a little longer and deserve to see a pay raise as well. We were lucky that in our partnership with the legislature, we secured $500 million in last year's budget as a recurring appropriation to support that new teacher compensation categorical in the FEFP. And that has brought Florida now to the top 5 in the country for average minimum salary for teachers. However, I think that there's still more room for improvement there. And so this year, in the governor's budget recommendations, he felt that we can go further. So he's recommending to increase that categorical by 10%, an additional $50 million per year in that categorical to continue that dedication and that commitment to raising teacher compensation. And the way that categorical was written in law, 80% of those funds go towards raising the minimum salary. 20% of those funds go towards raises for other teachers that may not be at the minimum, to make sure that we're not experiencing that compression issue where you may have a brand new teacher who's making almost the same as a teacher's been there for 3 or 4 or 5 years. So as we continue to make more investments in that categorical, it will be spread out that way under the 80-20 distribution, and with the investment from the counties, from the school districts, in the partnership of the FEFP, where roughly half the budget's the state budget, roughly half the budget's the district budget. We're confident we can continue to drive up that compensation and pay our teachers what they deserve so that we can continue to have high quality talent pool for our K-12 system. Additionally, in the education budget, the governor increased by 10% the mental health education categorical. So that is currently at $100 million in the budget. Governor is recommending another $10 million added on top of that. During the pandemic, mental health impacts have been particularly significant, particularly for students and for children that have been separated from their friends, have been isolated, and are experiencing some of those mental health impacts from the pandemic. And that's something that we feel needs to be addressed in our K-12 education funding portfolio. With that, I think those are some of the big highlights here for the budget. So I don't know how you want to handle going forward. I can take some questions, or I'll kick it over back to you guys.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Awesome. So we've got some questions that have been submitted by our live audience here that I'll just kind of read off to you, and hopefully you can give some guidance on them. The first one, is there a priority for support to cities within impaired springs, Bmaps, PFAs, having to undergo septic to sewer conversions?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So a couple things on that. Back when we were making the decisions on vetoes last year, one of the criteria the governor used when deciding which projects to veto was fiscally constrained communities. And because there's always a lot of water projects in the budget every year. Every year there's 80 million, 70 million, 100 million, whatever the number is. There's different amounts of appropriation in there for specific projects that were related to water projects. Governor wanted to prioritize those projects that were in Bmaps, that were in impaired waterways, and particularly if it was a fiscally constrained county, that could include drinking water. But the biggest priority has been water quality improvement. The governor's budget does recommend funding in the form of grants and assistance to local communities to continue movements towards conversion from septic to sewer, and that is a priority for the governor.
And the next one, what is the biggest drop in state revenue that you've seen?
So the biggest drop in state revenue is sales tax. Sales tax makes up about 80% of our budget. Florida does not have a personal income tax. We have a corporate income tax, and that makes up, we get money from that, and it's definitely a revenue source. But 80% of our budget, of our revenues every year is from sales tax. And so when you have businesses that are closed, consumers that are not willing to go out into the community, as we saw last summer, when we were at the peak of this, and people were staying at home, businesses were going to takeout only or delivery only. You saw a contraction in that type of consumer spending. As a result of that, you saw a decrease in your sales tax. We've seen a radical improvement from there. Consumers are getting back out there now. I think that a lot, especially if you're not vulnerable, if you are younger, if you are not in a vulnerable category for the virus, you've seen a lot of economic activity from those individuals. And it's difficult to say what's driving that. I've read articles about whether or not stimulus is contributing to any of that. I think it's an interesting note to see that Americans on average savings rates are now north of 20% when normally it's 3, 4, 5%. So Who knows where all that money is, whether it's being saved now or whether it's being spent. But the reality on the ground is that our sales tax collections have improved pretty decently, and that is the driving force of our revenues portfolio.
Thanks, Chris. I'm going to take one from the online chat. The federal government has mentioned domestic travel bans for states that have had cases of COVID-19 variants. Florida leaders have publicly opposed this. What is the likelihood of a travel ban?
So we saw that article too yesterday. We're not sure what they mean by a domestic travel restriction. You know, the state has not received any type of a restriction from the federal government directly. We've heard, we read the Miami Herald article that talked about it. The state of Florida has done well in the pandemic, despite, I think, a lot of the reporting on the state's performance in the pandemic. We're the third largest state, so you'd expect that we'd have more cases than smaller states. On a per capita basis, though, the state of Florida ranks very well among hospitalizations and particularly among deaths. And I think that's an important factor, that we are lower than I think half of the other states in the country on per capita deaths, despite the fact that the age makeup of our state is substantially higher. You know, we are a retiree state with a much larger cohort of our population being in the senior category, and that's the most vulnerable category for COVID-19. The governor's focus during the whole pandemic has always been protect the vulnerable, and that's why early on he established, I believe, 20, I forget the exact number, but a good number of COVID isolation nursing homes to be able to make sure that we're taking individuals out of those environments if they become infected, so that we don't see some of what happened in other states when it comes to the virus running rampant through a nursing home. We also did strike teams, going in and testing staff at these long-term care facilities. And for a period of time, had a very dedicated and first of its kind in the country dedication to bi-weekly testing of all staff in all long-term care facilities supported by the state through a partnership with our Division of Emergency Management, our National Guard, and private players. So by having this focus on protecting the vulnerable, and now with the vaccine of prioritizing those age 65 and older, we've been able to do very well. We don't feel that it would be appropriate to look at a state like Florida and say, well, now someone shouldn't go to a state like Florida. We're doing well in this pandemic response. And frankly, we're not sure whether or not the federal government can actually impose domestic travel restrictions. So that's what I'll say about that.
Are you still firm on not rating the Sadowski Trust Fund?
Yes. So the governor's commitment every year in office has been to fully fund affordable housing. His first budget recommendations did that. I think it was a pleasant surprise for a lot of the advocates. His second budget recommendations also fully funded the affordable housing programs. This third budget also fully funds the affordable housing programs. There's a caveat. So last year, we vetoed the SHIP program because that was about $220 million, because we instead used $250 million from the Coronavirus Relief Fund to invest through the SHIP infrastructure to provide those same types of housing assistance for individuals impacted by COVID-19. We felt that was the priority that was needed during the pandemic, but now we're back into this year and fully funding the estimate of the revenues for the affordable housing program.
Thanks. So I'll go back to some of the questions from the folks in the audience here live today. The governor and his wife have been very supportive of mental health initiatives. And as you heard John Guthrie earlier, noted that there were over 5,000 Baker Acts in our community last year. How do you see budget cuts offsetting these initiatives and progression?
So the governor's budget did not recommend any reductions in services for mental health. Actually, in the governor's budget, we recommend increases in investment in mental health. I don't have the exact number for you. I can provide it to Dylan from our office and maybe share with you guys. But mental health has been a top priority for the governor and for the First Lady. We used some funds from the Coronavirus Relief Fund to further bolster some of our CAT teams, FACT teams, other different types of services provided through the CBCs and MEs that partner with the Department of Children and Families, and those funds are now getting out there to expand some of those treatment programs, expand some of those available beds, expand some of those partnerships with the service providers that are in the community. And again, the governor does not recommend any reductions in those services.
In the next 6 months to a year, what is your office excited about or look to see an improvement?
What are we excited about or look to see an improvement? I think that we're going to continue to see an improvement overall in the Florida economic outlook, and that'll translate into improvement in our state's revenue position. I think that Florida has, if our unemployment rate is telling us anything, Florida's recovery is strong and stronger than I think the national average for recovery. Some of the policies that the governor has embraced over the last year of keeping the economy open, keeping schools open, being number one, have really translated into enabling people to continue to work, to continue to go out and engage in the economy, while doing so in a cautious way, understanding their own risks and their own vulnerabilities, and allowing the state to dedicate its resources and focus to the most vulnerable, and now to the vaccination efforts. So as we go forward, and as the vaccine continues to expand in our population, and as individuals continue to get out into the economy, I believe that the future is pretty bright.
The clerk's office revenues are way down in our county and across the state due to COVID. This has tremendous impact on our court system. Do you anticipate any additional state funding in this area to compensate?
So we've been working with the courts going back, I believe, to about July of last year. Their positions improved a lot. The court system is funded through fees collected through the court process. So when a lot of the courts shut down and went to virtual only court proceedings and weren't moving forward with a lot of criminal prosecutions and that sort of thing, the revenue went down substantially for those clerks. As courts are reopening and as they're moving through the dockets now, and some of them have some pretty substantial backlogs, their revenues are improving. They're not anywhere near back to where they were before, but there are mechanisms in place to move money around in the court system to ensure that they are meeting their critical needs. We continue to have those discussions with the clerks of court, and I think now also the legislature. Now that they are in the process of analyzing the budget and developing their process for how they're going to ultimately write the budget. I know that they're having those conversations with the clerks. I think it's kind of let's monitor the situation as we continue to go forward.
Next question, are there plans to overhaul the DEO unemployment website, and do you have a number of how many unemployed still have not received payment?
So on the have not received payment front first, I believe that we're up to now at least probably better than 99% of unique claimants that have received their payment. We've gone through and we're not nearly at the stage that we were early on in the pandemic, where we were getting just unprecedented. And actually, you know what? I just got the email on that. So $22 billion is how much has been paid out so far to 2.2 million unique individual claimants. And that's a huge amount of money. A portion of that's our state revenue. A portion of that is our federal programs through the CARES Act. But we've cleared through a lot of that. So it's not where things were months and months ago when it was difficult for the system to just be able to make payments. There are still problems with the system, and individuals are still experiencing problems, especially as new programs are put into the system. When the federal government creates new programs through whether it's CARES Act or HR 133, it takes time to build that into the system. And so it's definitely not perfect. The governor's described the system as a jalopy, and that is, I think that's an accurate way of describing it. What's happening now is there is an independent third-party study that's being conducted right now, kind of a feasibility study, a review of what needs to be done with this system. We have not gotten back the results of that study yet, so there's not a recommendation in the governor's budget for a specific action on the system, because it would be premature to put in just an assumption of what needs to happen. We don't know if we have to reprocure the whole thing and build a whole new system, or if we need to fix some aspect of it. I'm not an IT guy, so I don't know what kind of things go into a system like that. But if one piece of it's broken and can be fixed and the system will work, then we'd want to invest in that. If the whole thing needs to be overhauled, then the state will want to invest in that. We won't know the answer to that until we get that study back. And that study will get back in time for the legislature to be able to see what the recommendations are and then make a decision at that point.
Thanks, Chris. And then our last question this morning, in the governor's $1 billion line item vetoes, what were the big ticket items?
So big ticket items that were in there, really the ship veto was a large one. That was $220 million. And again, we ended up using coronavirus relief fund money to provide the same types of services to those same types of communities, but just with a COVID focus. Other than that, a lot of it across the board was various local projects, kind of, non-recurring one-time investments here and there on projects. The governor vetoed a couple of increases in rate for different kind of medical rate. The analysis he did there was to look back and say, has this type of Medicaid rate received a rate increase in the last 3 years or last 4 years? If the answer was yes, then let's put a pause on further increasing that rate. If the answer is no, it went through. It was a painstaking process of going through. I think our veto message, which is just the list of each line item, was 18 pages long. So it wasn't just a handful of big things, veto 800 million here and 200 million there. It was a lot of specific things throughout the budget that were vetoed. And the governor put a lot of time into that. Again, he held the budget from March until June to be able to go through that process and look at everything in the budget very, very methodically. After the vetoes were done, government continued to function, services continued to be provided. It wasn't the end of the world. And so I think the governor made a very, very wise choice there and really carefully picked the things that he decided to veto.
Thanks so much, Chris. And thank you for being here with us this morning. Thanks to everybody live and virtually for attending. And I'm going to turn it over to our CEO, Nancy Keeper, for some closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Len. Really appreciate it. Chris, wow, what an incredible presentation. I think whether you're online or in person, we just got a great lesson in the budget. When Jim Cameron came to me and said, we're going to talk budget at 8 o'clock in the morning, I was like, this isn't going to work unless I'm fully caffeinated. So I did put a full pot of coffee in front of me, but I'll tell you, what an incredible job in presentation. Thank you for making it practical and applicable to our understanding of what's going on in the state. I also want to do a shout out to my staff. I am so pleased with how this all worked out. We've been doing virtual events for a long time, ever since, a year ago, but to bring it into a hybrid format like this, we've got people here, we've got people online. I thought it was incredible. Ken, Shauna, Jim, what a great job. I'm really proud, and we look forward to seeing how this works at other events we have going on. And the Yacht Club couldn't go without saying thank you to them. They invested in some technology, and I think it worked very, very well. We do have another event coming up this month. It'll be next week on Tuesday. It's our business after hours. Again, it'll be a safely distanced outdoor event, but we do encourage you, if you're comfortable, to come out. We'll be at One Daytona, Four Rivers, and Rock Bottom will be sponsoring that. So it looks like it'll be a really great time. And again, I just want to do a mark your calendar for coming up. The March 16th and 17th will be our virtual Volusia Days. And again, I think you can see how we can use technology. We've got a great format plan for that, where you'll be able to listen to agency speakers, dive into some of the issues, and we'll also be having an opportunity for you to make appointments to talk to our elected representatives. We're very excited about that. So look for news on that. As you go out there, we hope you'll support our businesses. They need us to support them, and they're doing everything they can to be safe and to get the consumer confidence that they want your business and they're ready to serve you. Let's all follow our county campaign of wash up, back up, and mask up. Thank you all and have a wonderful day.